now they're invested in this project. And it may be a project that everybody's been interested in from the very beginning, but it doesn't mean they were invested in the project. But the surprising thing that came about after doing protocols for over 6 months was the level of support that we got from people within the District of Columbia.
So after we finished with our protocols, we then moved on to test out those protocols, see if it worked. So we started with a pilot of a CIR. Our goal was to start with one legal topic, and we decided on family law. And even within family law, we limited it to very specific areas of family law that we would take on for the CIR. We put together a group of 10 legal service organizations all throughout the district, ranging from rather small to rather large. And so we put it to the test. We used the system that Joseph built for us that he talked about earlier, and we hired 2 navigators who were solely responsible for doing the initial screenings and then referring this out to the different organizations. We started the pilot in the summer of 2024, and it was designed to last until the end of the year. We wanted to get enough data for Kelly and her team to be able to evaluate this further.
Right, so the second piece of the data collection was around the pilot launch. So we wanted to evaluate the protocols, as Ashley described. We also wanted to evaluate how the system was working, so if the technological platform and the workflows were actually working as intended, and if anything needed to be adjusted. So the whole goal of the pilot really was to learn. So the majority of our research questions pertain to implementation, so what's working well, what isn't working so well, what needs adjustment, where can we tighten or refine things, and that was true. And it's a very helpful foundation as then the district looks to roll out the system kind of more broadly to other areas of law. And so we're hoping that we've learned enough to be able to support the eventual rollout across.
So once we got through December, one of the things that was necessary is to identify a permanent host. So the pilot program was done by Neighborhood Legal Services Program of DC, but we needed someone who was going to house this permanently. So right now, we're in the process of selecting a new host for the program. And DCBF, DC Bar Foundation, anticipates making a selection at the end of January, beginning of February. In the meanwhile, NLSP continues to host, but we're not actively promoting it. We're just holding it in a holding pattern for the full launch. And we're really excited to see where it goes.
So we talked about the strategy. Now let's talk about the people that were actually involved with the pilot and the building the CIR system.
Right, and as you saw from that last slide with the roadmap, there was no one step that was community engagement. I mean, we did do some focus groups in that phase 2, but the reason why it's not up there as a discrete step is that we didn't think about it as one. It's actually more of a philosophy or an approach, and so we've gathered input and feedback from all sorts of folks all along the way. And so I'm going to talk with you a little bit about what some of that looked like. Oh, thanks, Ashley. So as Ashley mentioned on this second or so slide, and I should also mention, I mean, I'm assuming that you're getting the sense of exactly how collaborative this entire thing was, even as we banter back and forth up here, and then we have other colleagues in the audience. This was really a very fundamentally collaborative approach. It was a total team effort from top to bottom. And let me get back on track. And it was a beautiful team. Ashley's first slide, when she talked about the purpose, said one of the first core values was making sure that it was client-centered. And so we often internally would talk about this as being user-centered. And then when we actually started to think about, well, who are the users, we realized we kind of have 2 groups of users. One is the district residents, who we want to make sure can more quickly and more efficiently make their way to connect with an attorney. And the other group of users is actually the legal service organizations, whose intake staff are going to have to be interacting with the referral system and kind of going back and forth and somehow incorporating that workflow into their own. And so indeed, we sought input from both of these groups of users. And so for the legal service community, for the most part, we looked for input from them that helped us structure system design and the protocols and kind of specific components of how it would function. And we did some early interviews with folks after the concept paper was put out. We also did focus groups with some service providers who are currently working, let me back up, in DC. Since there are so many legal service providers, there are a couple of smaller issue-specific intake networks that are already operating, like there's one around eviction, for example. And so we had focus groups with the small number of legal service organizations that participate in those networks to make sure that we were learning from them. So we wanted to hear from their experience, what they knew, what worked well, what could we glean and continue to build on. The Bar Foundation also ran monthly CIR chats, which were these virtual meetings that happened every month that were open to the legal services community, and folks could connect, ask questions, get project updates, offer input on certain unanswered questions. So it was a very kind of engaging environment. The Pilot Protocols Working Group, which Karen mentioned before, was a way for some of the legal service providers to come together and actually help figure out, like, what is the structure of this? How should it work? Like, we want the experts who are doing the work to help us determine what workflows are reasonable. How much time do you need to be able to process a referral before something can get placed? So they were the folks to help determine what those things were. And then the pilot participants group for the group of family law service providers that Ashley mentioned who are actually part of the pilot, they met on a regular, like weekly or every other weekly basis to continually provide feedback about how things were going, what was working and what wasn't. So from the very beginning, there's been an enormous amount of input from the providers around, how is this going for you? What would you like to have happen? How could it work better? At the same time, there has been a good amount of feedback and input given by DC residents also. So as I mentioned early on, we did, in that sort of phase 2 space, we did 20 focus groups and talked to a little over 100 people in DC, and we targeted folks from either historically marginalized communities or from groups who we know have vulnerabilities when it comes to interacting with the legal system or the court system. Folks like people who have limited proficiency in English, older adults, survivors of domestic violence, sexual abuse, just to make sure that we were actually reaching the people who may theoretically have the hardest time navigating the system, and make sure that we built something that was designed to meet their needs. And so at a lot of discussion there, we heard a lot from them that was incredibly helpful around how the system could be designed and how the navigators could do their work in a way that allowed people to feel like they were heard, valued, and kind of held through the process. When it came to naming the system and figuring out the messaging, there was another consultant that came on board who isn't here today that also gathered input from the community and did a pretty broadly sampled community survey where they got, they kind of took the temperature about different names and messaging communications things. So there was community input there. Joseph and his team did some testing, like user testing of an early beta version of the system, which also informed how things were developed. And we've worked into the system a text survey for applicants to provide feedback after they interact with the navigator. So if someone talks with the CIR navigator, is referred on, so many days later, they'll get a text prompt to offer some feedback on how it went. So this is just up and running now. We don't have a lot of data there yet, but that's our hope to kind of build in resident feedback to the system overall. So we've really worked pretty hard to make sure that all of the voices are included. And this slide shows just a very partial list of the organizations that have been involved. Or even just the type. So lots of feedback and input from legal aid organizations, also social service providers, the Social Justice Transformations Network, which I'll talk about in just a second. DC's Access to Justice Commission has also been really active. The Legal Service Corporation sponsors the TIG grant, which is super helpful. And then the libraries, the courts. I mean, there's been lots of folks kind of coming together to help decide how this thing should be built to make sure that it actually serves the needs of DC residents. And I'll take just a quick second to talk about the Social Justice Transformations Network, which is another initiative of the DC Bar Foundation, kind of alongside the CIR. I don't know, for those of you who are familiar with network theory or network science, that is a way of approaching complex problems. When you have super complex problems like access to justice, for example, that no one organization can really change, right? So a networked approach actually helps to move the needle on some of these larger problems in a way that a single organization can't. And the Bar Foundation knew this, and they created a space for legal service organizations, social service organizations, and government entities, all of whom are presumably serving some of the same clients, right, to come together behind a common mission of advancing access to civil justice and collaborate, get to know each other, break down institutional barriers, and come up with innovative ways to actually make the system work better. And so the CIR is kind of part and parcel of that effort. And there's an intention down the road. So right now CIR is focused on legal service, but I think down the road there's an intention that there may be other non-legal service providers folded in so that folks could get referrals in more than one place. And so the Social Justice Transformations Network will be a wonderful partner there. So there's a great foundation in the district for those kinds of relationships.
If you remember in the beginning, we were talking about coordinated intake being a considered approach to clients' ever evolving needs. This is an example. Social Justice Transformations Network, one of the things that they do is they not only pull together the legal services folks, but they also pull together social justice folks. That can include social workers and a whole host of people that service our clients. One of the thoughts about our coordinated intake and referral system is as we move further down the line and we get our legal services organizations on board, that there will be an opportunity to integrate social services and social justice organizations in that tool. So just as a part of that, Social Justice Transformations Network is going to help that because we're already starting those kinds of conversations.
Should I freestyle from here? Okay. All right, a few thoughts come to mind listening to Kelly. So first is that DC Bar Foundation is a very evaluation-focused organization, which is awesome. And so what that means for this project is that Kelly and her team and MPC Research, they were involved from the very beginning and throughout the project. So imagine many of your TIG grants, how you do an evaluation at the end. Well, imagine you had an evaluator the whole time. Now, to be honest, sometimes I'm trying to build this system, and then Kelly's like, well, what about this and this? And I'm like, oh, I'm trying to build this system, you're killing me. But that's a good like accountability measure of like, okay, well, how am I going to measure this? What about this? What about that? So I encourage you, if you can have an evaluator involved for the whole project, I encourage you to do that. It really made a huge difference for how this project progressed. Another point I want to make came about from your talk there, Karen, about the Social Justice Transformations Network, is that the way I see coordinated intake is it provides a foundation for innovation. So if everyone, let's think of the opposite, if everyone's just doing their own thing, you don't really have a platform to innovate from because you're not working together. One organization could innovate, or you could try some things, but you don't have a common platform to improve the overall system for all applicants, for all legal services organizations. Coordinated intake does that. Now, before you can get there, though, you have the Social Justice Transformations Network, and that's where you already have this group of people who are collaborating. And I actually have a kind of a somewhat stark contrast on this. So I'm working on a TIG project in Wyoming, and the providers in Wyoming, they don't talk on a regular basis. They don't have a Social Justice Transformations Network. They don't have any of that infrastructure to collaborate. So when we did a project, it was a triage system. It was hard to get the organizations to contribute and to give input because that's not how they function. So I would encourage you to already have that relationship and, in a sense, like a place to convene on a regular basis naturally before you go in and try to do coordinated intake. And I think, so the Social Justice Transformations Network gets together quarterly, is that right? Yeah, so they have a quarterly in-person convening, so you have a natural spot to come together and collaborate, and then projects like this can come from it. All right, so now let's talk about design. Okay, I'll talk about the actual things I'm supposed to talk about. Okay, so the way I go about projects often is that I always want to make an improvement from one project to the next. So the big thing I focused on with this one, coming from Minnesota to DC, is that I thought it made sense, given the number of providers and how the number of cases were dispersed across many organizations, to have actual person navigator at the center of the system, and that navigator is supervised by an attorney. So in Minnesota, it's, I would say, a little bit more of a tech solution in that they can transfer cases between organizations, and the organizations themselves do the intake. So it goes to, it's separated by 4 regions, and a call gets routed according to the person's area or zip code they put in to one of the 4 major LLC-funded organizations in Minnesota. And there's only one LLC-funded organization in DC. So, and you can't break it up by geography in DC. It's like, how could we make sure there's a good experience? And so there were some concepts from Mary McClellan about navigators. I thought, I think this could really make sense to have an actual person in the middle, and then they're using the system and then also guiding people to the right organization. So one thing to just know with this system, in the next slide we'll get to it about the path, is you have actual human navigators in the middle of this, making sure everyone's getting to the right place, answering questions, et cetera. And also they text message a lot with the applicants, and then that is integrated into the coordinated intake system. Okay, so it's not a tech-only solution. All right, next one I want to talk about in terms of the model here is that it doesn't use branch logic, okay? So, and this came about, some of my thoughts on this came about from working on triage and seeing that a lot of systems use branch logic. And so what that meant is if you add another provider, you have to review everything to see if you should change your branch logic. So we're like, no branch logic. Think more like Google, okay? You just put something in, and then the algorithm is going to tell you what the top results are. So when a navigator puts in an intake, it's going to do an algorithm to show the top providers based on the criteria. So it makes it much more manageable. And if another organization says, oh, now we do this service, or oh, we change our criteria, now you have to be at this income level, whatever it may be, the system is going to figure that out when it goes to see which providers the person is eligible for. So I encourage you, if you're doing something like this, be very careful about using branch logic, because if anything changes, you have to a degree, manually go in and change that. So I encourage you to use something that's use an algorithm to determine which organizations it should go to. Okay, I'm not there yet.
Sorry.
I know, I'm all over the place. Sorry, that's me, that's on me. All right, as far as the model, okay, one of the things that I thought about in this is I wanted to make it as easy as getting a ride share like an Uber or a Lyft. So a person goes onto their phone and they put where they're going, and then the system is going to look across all these drivers and determine the best one for you. So I was like, okay, I want to do the same idea. I want to make it that simple. So you go in, you put what you need, and the system is going to determine, like the best driver, the best ride driver for you. Likewise, so if you've ever driven for Uber or Lyft, interesting experience, I have. The way it works is that you just toggle on that you're available to do rides, and then you get this little pinging sound like, all right, you've got a ride. So we want to also mimic that for legal service organizations. You put in, so a driver puts in their car, a little bit about themselves, et cetera. They have to do a check on their car to make sure it's good, et cetera. So legal service organizations put in the areas of law they cover, financial eligibility, and then they're going to get cases based on that. So same idea is try to make it as simple as possible, like Uber or Lyft apps. Okay, another thing that we did throughout the project, this is more getting into it, is that we made it so that each organization can customize their own income logic. So when they go into the system, they choose, all right, here are the types of income that I want to count towards my federal poverty guidelines. And if I want to collect assets, I can or not. I can configure my own income per se. So income is an income in this system. Income is depending on your organization and how you set it up. So let's say that your organization, I think Ashley, your organization has one benefit, it doesn't
We do
conclude.
not count food stamps,
Okay.
as most LSC organizations here. No.
Exactly. So they don't count food stamps. So they have all these different income types, and they're going to select which ones they include and then deselect, for example, food stamps. And to all the numbers they get and what they're eligible for, it's going to calculate accordingly. So another organization maybe doesn't include something else. Okay, you can deselect it. It won't be included. That goes into the flexibility aspect.
Can I add something to that?
Go ahead,
Joseph?
Ash. Go ahead, yeah.
I just want to
I'll
also
get a
add
drink.
that with the 50 legal service providers, all of them have different eligibility criteria. Some are 400% of AMI, others are 125% of FPG. Some, like, they're kind of all over the map. So when he built the algorithm, it takes into account all of those things, which is really kind of amazing when you think about it.
And not only income, but specific factors. For
Right.
instance, we have an organization that only serves survivors of sex trafficking. One of the things we wanted to be mindful of is not ask every single person who calls, are you a survivor of sex trafficking? But instead, narrow down those cases that may be acceptable to them and then ask those questions. So Joseph did an amazing job of, if that organization may be a good fit, reach all these other requirements, then the question pops up. So that way, we're one, not asking potentially traumatizing and sensitive issues to those who wouldn't even be eligible for the organization. And two, we're making sure to capture those that may not be the most populous in the area. So that way, there are those individuals who can get to the best organization for them. So it's not only flexibility of income, which it kind of shocked me how many ways there is to calculate income in the district. But it has those extra factors that go above and beyond.
Yeah, so I saw all these different ways to calculate income, and I'm like, hold on. Let me build like a data model for this so that, it's going to go bounce against that organization's criteria and then push back what it is. And then I don't know if I touched on this as far as the model, but the model is that a person, if they need legal help, they just call one number. And by calling that one number, they're going to get them to the right place. Or they can apply online, and the navigators will see that intake. They'll call the person or get in touch with them, and they're going to get them to the right place. So try to how can we make it as simple as possible to get legal help? Okay, let's go to the next slide now. Sorry, I'll try to hurry up. Okay, so this goes through it, and it's horizontal here. But there is a navigator in the middle. So a person, and right now we mostly use social services providers that put in referrals for the people they help. It goes to a navigator contacts them and does an eligibility screening. There are automated text messages and emails that go out throughout the process. And then the people, they can just respond to those notifications, and it goes right into the system. Also, when the navigators go into a case, they see the full text message history with that person. So I guess that was another thing that was always on my mind with this one, is I want to put text messages and the case, put it all together into one system. Then the organization will make a referral, and this gets a little bit to that to the LSO, legal service organization side, and in the Uber example, like the driver, is how can I make it so simple for them so they get the email notifications about a new case. They go in, it tells them the next step in the process. So we'll start with the conflict check, whether they have a conflict or not. If they don't have a conflict, then they'll see the rest of the information about the applicant, and then they can determine whether they can take the case or not. And it will tell them around the page, here's the next step, is deciding that. And then if they do take the case, then the next step is to fill out information for evaluation about what the outcomes were. And then if they can't take the case or they have a conflict, they'll put in that they have a conflict, for example, and then the navigators will know that, and they'll make an assignment to another organization and go through that process again. And throughout all those, email and text notifications are sent to both the providers and the applicants. Did I miss anything on that?
No.
All right, I'm going to take a break.
So next question, what did we learn? Kelly said it, and it's become kind of my mantra in this past pilot experience. The purpose is to learn. Nothing is a failure, it is only a learning. because goodness, it felt sometimes like that wasn't the purpose. But so it was a really important thing to know while we were doing the pilot. What did we learn? So first we talked about construction. We had to prioritize adaptability. Like we've talked about before, there are so many different ways that our organizations calculate income. There's so many specific requirements. Some want to prioritize survivors of domestic violence. Some don't take any cases that involve domestic violence. So there was so much that needed to be adaptable when you are making this system. Next thing we learned was you got to start small and test the system with limited scope and limited participants. One thing we didn't talk about, but we even started smaller, is that there was a 2-week period where we did formalized testing with fake data, essentially. I made up about 26 different scenarios. Most of it involved Disney characters. It was great. But we started with that small just to make sure things were working, to make sure that A happened next, and then B, and then C, and then D, all that we thought it would, because we put in a lot of hard work and we put in our best thoughts at the time, but we wanted to make sure when push comes to shove, it actually worked the way we intended. And finally, one of the lessons we learned was partnership. Rely on those experts. I am not a tech person in any way, shape, or form, even though Karen likes to say I'm tech adjacent.
Pretty good.
But Joseph is all tech, and he has so much knowledge and so much bandwidth and so much, well, maybe not bandwidth, but yeah, that's not the right word. So much expanded knowledge about all of these things, and has experience with other areas in the country. And so relying on him to make suggestions about the technology and things that the way it works is phenomenal. It's not something that we could make up as legal service organizations, but relying on him. Same way with Kelly, when considering the ways that we want to evaluate, the ways we want to ask the people that participate in the system about their feedback, we rely on Kelly and her team and their expertise on how is the best way to get this information? What shows the biggest picture? How can we make this the strongest system in telling our story to when we launch the full CIR. So rely on your partners, rely on your experts.
Ashley, can I interrupt and
Absolutely.
add something? Thank you. I just want to add a little caveat to the lessons learned around construction. So Ashley said how important it was to make sure that the system was adaptable. So we're in the process now of kind of wrapping up the analysis for the pilot procedure, like the pilot evaluation report. And I will say that the vast majority of the time, the cases followed the protocol that was laid out, right? They only took 1 or 2 referrals. It took the right number of days. I mean, that held. So we did the right thing by pulling in the experts to figure out what are the workflows here that should go. And what they came up with was really sturdy. It held most of the time. However, as any of you who actually work in practice know that there's like some chunk of cases that just defy whatever linear process you have in place. So there's always some funny circumstances or something happens. So there was a chunk of cases that just did not conform to that linear process. And so therefore the adaptability is really important. And so I would add to that making sure you have a solid structure for here's what our process will be, or here's what we'd like it to be, and then also being prepared for the outliers and making sure that the system can accommodate them, making sure that the navigators are trained for them, because there will be some portion of cases that just don't fit. And we have, in this report, we have this terrible graphic.
It's beautiful.
Terrible.
Beautiful.
Because I want to have a data visualization that maps what happened to the cases. And for the bulk of them, it's fine. And then there's all these arrows and crazy things to show what happened to this minority percentage of cases that didn't fit the sort of linear process. And so the graphic has been affectionately named the interpretive dance because it's got arrows in like every direction. And so being ready for that at the beginning, right? The best laid protocols are going to work great a lot of the time, and then there's going to be some chunk of the time that you're going to have to kind of improvise and roll with what's going on, and to expect that ahead of time. That's my caveat.
Absolutely. So now you've heard us talk about, the ways that the things we were thinking of when we did it. What are some considerations if you want to take this to your jurisdiction?
Okay, I'll discuss suitability. First thing just to mention, because I wanted to include it, is how ambitious this project was. I think it was the most ambitious project I've ever seen, and I appreciate everyone here. I think it was somewhat of a catalyzing thing of, wow, this is huge. And I appreciate the DC Bar Foundation was willing to do something that was so ambitious. Let's get into here. I want to address a question that was earlier, and it deals with suitability and also the system. So how this works across case management systems. So the underlying database of the system uses what's called Airtable, and so you may be familiar with that tool. Airtable can connect with anything that has an API because it has an API. So by utilizing that, we can integrate with Legal Server or Clio or a Salesforce-based product, et cetera. So that's if you have many different case management systems across the providers in your jurisdiction, you'll want to make sure you use something that has APIs. I would say good APIs. Not all APIs are the same. By using Airtable, that gave us a lot of flexibility to integrate with any other tool. A few thoughts on suitability for your jurisdiction from my thought is that if you have cases that they go across a number of different providers in significant percentages, I think it could be a good fit for you. So if we took the opposite of that, if 98% of your cases go to one organization, then it's like, okay, that's, you could probably make a simple referral to that other 2%. But if it's, let's say, 20% here, 30% here, 15% here, something like that, like it was in Minnesota, DC, et cetera, then it can make a lot of sense to do something like this. And then one thing to mention is that thanks to the investments in Minnesota and Maryland and DC, now North Carolina, and this is probably true for a lot of projects, is that the cost comes down because you have experiences, best practices, systems. So I encourage you, if you're thinking about this, and this impacts the third item funding there, is see if there's a model that already exists that you can replicate. And each jurisdiction is a little bit different nuances. I think the Navigator model in DC and then also in Maryland, and they use 211 to take those calls. You can look at the different models and see what would fit for you, and then leverage either leveraging the best practices or processes and or the technology. And with that, I'll pass it to staffing.
Yeah, so staffing. When considering staffing this, what we decided in DC is that this needs to be housed in an organization, but the staff itself independent from the organization. So the way we have it modeled for the pilot is that NLSP is the host of the pilot, but our two navigators, while NLSP employees, all they do is CIR. All they do is focus on these. And we'll talk a little bit more about ethics and considerations like that, but it was really important for us to have those navigators, those two navigators that we have, completely separate. They do not have access to NLSP's case management system, to their internal documents. They just have access to the CIR system itself, keeping it completely separate. God bless legal aid attorneys, but we want to try to do it all. We want to have a new project, but try to do it with the staff that we have. And based on our experiences, we do not recommend that. It is too big of a project to add on to one more thing for our staff to do. So be considerate of that if you want to do a project like that. Also be considerate of where this is housed. Right now it is housed within an organization, but I mean the possibilities are endless, whether it's an independent organization, a sub-grantee in the organization itself. Think about where it is actually housed, but be very mindful of whatever you decide to be intentional of the way of doing it.
So with regard to funding, that's another issue because it costs to do this, and it costs quite a bit of money. I think what made this successful is that the DC Bar Foundation had a stable funding source. Now, it didn't pay for everything, but it was a steady stream throughout this project. Every year they would convince them to do it again. And it was the DC City Council who actually funded this project in terms of the stable funding that you could count on from year to year, or almost count on for year to year. Now, there are other funders, though. For example, NLSP saw, and we were awarded a TIG grant for this project that helped fund the technology portion of that. And Joseph, you say thank you, thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you.
And then there are other funders in the District of Columbia that I know that the Bard Foundation received funding from. One was K. Fritz Foundation. I knew about that one. I also know they applied for an ABA endowment fund for this project. So there were many, many funding sources in order to keep the project moving, if you know what I mean. But you really have to identify that one thread that you can count on and then layer on from there.
Next thing to consider is that confidentiality, ethics, and conflicts, and I kind of touched about this. One of the things that we mentioned that we have navigators, but those navigators we decided are not attorneys. They are trained in intake and supervised by an attorney, but they are not attorneys themselves. So one of the first questions that we had was, if it's a navigator who's doing the intake and then passing along to another organization, does attorney-client privilege go for that information they're giving? We never really came to a good answer with that. So we did it the other way. We talked to the DC Council to see if they could make an exception for any sort of centralized intake. So our partners who are able to do lobbying and whatnot took this information to the DC Council, and the DC Council actually passed legislation that made it clear that information gathered within a coordinated intake and referral is confidential information, so protecting our clients' information.
And that's part of the partnership piece of this, because we do have the DC Access to Justice Commission, who helped us out quite a bit, whether it was convening groups or going to the council or any of those kinds of things in order to make this a success. We're short of time. I'm going to shorten this a little bit just to say leadership and governance, how you direct an effort collectively owned by the community. Well, as you can see, and you have heard as a part of our presentation, that this had been something that had been bubbling up in the community for a long time. It did not get off the ground until DC Bar Foundation took the lead and led the effort, and that was really important in terms of getting the project going.
Do we want to skip to maybe questions?
Mm-hmm.
We're
going to skip to...
Okay. So we had a group talk again, but since we have 6 minutes left, move to if there's any questions that people may have. Yes, sir.
Do the organizations still maintain their own independent intake? And they can keep taking their own intake?
Yes, so the question was, does the organization maintain their own independent intake? Yes, so what the screening does is it does not get all of the information that a traditional intake would happen. It gets the basic information, basic legal problem, income to make sure they're qualified, and then it sends over. So the organization then does a full intake pursuant to their own protocols, and that information stays with them completely. They do not share that information back to the CIR. Even if they're unable to help that person and we have to refer them again, that information that they gather stays with them specifically. One of the things that we're looking for in the next group is there going to be any sort of sharing? But we did not want to broach that because we wanted to protect the client's information as much as possible when it came to sharing that information. Further conversations has if we can do that in a client-centered way, but as of right now, everything is separate, that it is not passed back and forth.
And there has not been a proposal to change the way people do intake. You still can do individual intake within your organization, and it's along with the networks and the hotlines and all of those kinds of things. What we imagine is some of that will shift over time as this becomes more and more active.
Another question in the back.
Yes, with 50 organizations, you're going to have lots of different grants that change their priorities and eligibility criteria and all that. How is the system updated? Do they do it, or do you reach out to them? How is that?
I can speak to that. Yeah, the organizations log in, they update their own information. So And that gets back to there's no branch logic because, that would not work. You just go in and you say, okay, maybe you change your area of law, your eligibility. There's also a toggle of just whether you're accepting cases currently or not. So if you can't handle anymore currently, you can just toggle it off and you won't get any cases. When you're ready, toggle it back on. What's that? I think so. What would you say?
We're working on making sure the protocols happen. But we're all learning. Anytime there's new systems, and we've heard this from our keynote speaker, anytime there's new system, it takes practice. And this is a baby project still it's not even a year old. So I would say everybody's doing as expected, in the sense that we're trying, but sometimes things are forgotten. So we have one question here and one question here. We'll go first.
Did the DC Bar Foundation require all of their grantees to participate, or was it an opt-in?
It is an opt-in in terms of who participates in the project. And that goes back to the other question where they were asking whether or not the intake systems remained singular intake systems with each organization, or were you forced to, if you will, have all your intake through this process? And as I said, you can still do your intake through your system, and nobody's forced to use this system. But I think what has happened is more people understand how effective the system could be for the problems that we experience in the District of Columbia.
Question in the green.
Yeah, I was excited about Airtable usage. For subject information, is that through an Airtable form, or how does that feed into the algorithm? Sorry.
So the question was, is the information accepted through an Airtable form?
The information is through Fillout, which is a tool that integrates with Airtable. So we use Airtable as a database, and then we use a lot of tools that connect to it, such as the front end that you actually consider like this actual system. It's not Airtable. Airtable is just the database on the back end. So we build a lot of front end systems that integrate with that.
Yes.
There's 2 questions in the app.
Okay.
Thank you.
Multiple votes.
Okay.
The first is, can you tell us more about the navigators and how 2 navigators were sufficient? If they were, at the pilot step, were they looking at or screening for eligibility?
Yes, the question was, talk more about the navigators. Were 2 navigators sufficient, and were they looking at to eligibility? So our 2 navigators are fantastic. I could sing an hour-long praises about our navigators. They both came from intake backgrounds. One had been an intake worker in Georgia for quite some time, and the other had been an intake worker through the DC Family Law Self-Help Center. So their jobs are basically to gather that information regarding eligibility, but the system that Joseph has built does that calculation for them and has all the organizational eligibility guidelines within the system, and it's doing those calculations for them. Now they have to interpret that. The way it kind of looks is it looks like a ranking system. So like the organization that's the best fit is at the top, and then as it goes down, a little less best fit. So they do have to have knowledge of the organizations itself in case, just for that backup, it's not doing everything, but it gives that basic information and gives a really good picture. So learning, they don't have to learn all of the nuances of every organization, but having that good knowledge. And that's where partnership comes through. So they have those relationships to say, if there's something that maybe is a little different, because like Kelly says, there's always those outliners, they can give the organization a call to see if that is something that fits before sending over the referral.
And they can also, in all the rankings of who would be the best fit, you can drill into it and see all the organization's details.
And I'd also like to add that in addition to eligibility, the navigators are doing some work to really size up the legal issue to make sure, because some folks will call and they might not be entirely clear about what the issue is. And so using non-attorney navigators in that respect is kind of innovative and helpful. And we've talked internally a lot about how helpful it would be if there's an attorney supervisor, so someone who can step in and actually help with those kinds of fine-grained decisions.
One more question?
What does the service do to support or respond to individuals who are not eligible? Is providing referral or some kind of resources to these individuals part of your role?
Yes, so it was a question about if someone calls or is referred and they're not eligible, what happens? So we have a lovely bank of resources, also helped put together by the community. we're doing family law right now, but we are specifically not doing protective orders. And some organizations consider protective orders part of their family. So we have gotten a few protective order cases referred over to us accidentally. Our navigators have information about organizations that they might need to go to fill out the protective orders, to represent during the protective orders, or any sort of enforcement of the protective orders. And Joseph has put together all that in a database, and it can be just texted out if that is needed. So it is, the ground base is there, and the sky's the limit of having a database.
So,
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
are we done?
I could say one fast thing. I was just going to say there's also a corollary effort in DC around bolstering the available legal information and self-help information that's out there. And so our anticipation is that these things will sort of dovetail, that once those materials are really kind of solidified and bolstered, then the navigators will be able to easily connect folks to self-help materials when they're not eligible for direct service.
So I just wanted to thank you all for coming, and I also wanted to thank once again our extraordinary person who put together the PowerPoint and helps us all the time coordinate all these efforts, and she's just great. And also I wanted to thank Joseph's team for all the work that they do. And Kelly has her team as well. They're just fantastic. And of course, the extraordinary Ashley here. And most of all, I'd like to thank the DC Bar Foundation and the community in the District of Columbia. Without that, we could not have made this happen. Thank you so much for coming.
Good job. Go team.